Sean's back. Haven't seen him in a while. Welcome.
Wherever there are dags, I will be there.
Hi, everyone. I'm just covering for Jory today, so just in case you didn't recognize my name or anything.
I didn't recognize your name. I wasn't sure if there are people that saw Rom's thing and said, "Oh, I should show up for this." And I was feeling bad that they might be disappointed because I heard from Rom that he probably won't be able to make it today. So
Stranger
welcome,
danger.
Aaron.
Exactly.
Peter, I'm drawing a blank. I know I've seen your name before, but I'm scrolling back to see if you've joined one of our meetings before in the past, and I don't think I see you on any of these. So welcome. That was also my opportunity to say if there's anything you wanted to throw on the agenda, this would be a good opportunity to let us know if there's anything you want to chat about. Otherwise, we just kind of chit chat about anything. A couple minutes after, I did mention Rom reached out to me earlier and said that he probably won't be able to make it today. So we had his demo slated that he wanted to talk about some stuff. Probably won't get to hear from him this week. And so guess next week he'll show up and give that demo, hopefully. I went looking through a few things. I saw that the TOB election results are in. And for some reason, Josh didn't run like he said he was going to run. He was bluffing the whole time. He fooled me.
He's very upset about that, at least facetiously.
I was expecting to have a good election and to like knock down drag out.
And
But no,
instead, we didn't even have an election.
no, it's just if anybody wanted to vote, sorry, it's over.
We had a volunteering.
Yeah. So myself, Tianon, Alexa, and Mike Brown for anybody that's curious. Since there are only 4 people running and only 4 positions open, that just solves that. So the only other thing I threw on the agenda was I've been having some back and forth with different groups about what they're trying to do with this kept to mount volumes in Kubernetes. And it's a bit of a Mike Brown thing, but other people might be interested in chatting about it too, because it's starting to bleed over into people want to use this. People have read the blog post out there that say OCI artifacts are supported. And so they go to define an OCI artifact and realize that what that KEP really supports is only OCI images. And so they're redefining their content to look like an image, but also have all the fields of an artifact. And it's getting to be very very unusual. So I'll drop the link here if anybody wants to dig through what their, or at least one group is doing. And I've been seeing this a lot from groups. Everybody is showing up saying, hey, we want to do this thing. And they try to do it. And then next thing you know, it just doesn't come out with a good result. I think the first person I heard that was looking at this, they said, oh, that means I can mount a Helm chart. They went to mount the Helm chart and it was like, nope, doesn't work, not supported. So drop the link in there. People looking at this. John, if you're jumping on camera after looking at this, I'm thinking you might be having the same reaction I'm having.
What is supported?
So the volume source in Kubernetes only supports an OCI image right now. You can mount an OCI image as a volume.
What kind of validation is it doing?
They're looking at the config media type and the layer media types just like any runtime would. And the runtime is saying, hey, this is not a valid OCI image, so it's rejecting it. And so what people are saying is, hey, I can just put artifact type all over my container image and just do it that way.
That's what I would do.
That's what they did. And so it's coming out with this weird hybrid where they're saying I'm an OCI image config with all the OCI layers, but I slapped artifact type all over every field in there.
Beautiful.
Malicious compliance.
Yeah. I raised an issue saying this is not how we define an artifact on our side. And anybody that's writing tooling is free to not support what they're doing and still be OCI conformant. Go ahead, John.
Your position is that the KEP is overly restrictive on what it allows to be mounted?
My position is that the KEP has given a lot of people false impressions. And so they're running with the artifact support. And then when they run into problems, they just redefine their artifact to look like an image to get around the fact that they wanted an artifact, but the KEP only supports images.
Oh man, I love when the arguments I made 2 years ago are true. Yeah. I don't know. It seems kind of fine. But
I've been
what's bad? What's the bad
I've been
part?
fighting back channels with the KEP team to please update their documentation and say they're just supporting images for right now and stop advertising artifact support, and maybe that would turn some of this back.
Yeah, it's interesting because like if you're mounting something as a volume, it ought to be probably a tar shaped blob at least. And the flexibility of arbitrary OCR artifacts means that you can't just mount arbitrary things. They'd have to be tar shaped things.
And to give you an idea of the other kinds of requests we got, I just closed this now because nobody responded to it saying they liked the idea. But image spec had pull request 1197, where someone said, I want to make a new layer media type that's just called .raw, so that I can insert any random content that is now an official OCI layer that must now be supported by any runtime, so that I can mount random files inside of my image. And we looked at it and we're like, you're just trying to do a workaround for mounting an artifact inside of an image and trying to force the runtime to support this, aren't you? And they're like, yeah, pretty much. It's like we're working the problem from the wrong direction.
Yeah, instead of having an uncompressed tar header that has a file name and a path and user permissions, they want some JSON on that file instead. Like it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. But with the benefit that one of these things is already supported by all the tools in the ecosystem.
Yes, the immovable object we continue to come back to is like, why don't you do it in a way that already works? Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to suggest. Just like put a kilobyte of metadata around your file and you've got something that works today. Is that unworkable, or were they satisfied with the suggestion?
I think they were a little sad that we rejected their proposal because they just wanted to be able to push any kind of random bytes inside of a blob and ship it.
I think
There are advantages to that.
part of the problem that, at least I feel like I can speak for John here, that me and John are both having, is that we understand that the tar format is just a single kilobyte of header data followed by the file data. And then you repeat that again and again and again because it's designed for tape archives. And it's a really simple format, very straightforward, very low overhead, like it's designed for this. And I don't know that that is universal knowledge. And so bridging that gap between the way that me and John understand TARs and many other people in this community understand TARs and the way that people who don't understand TARs, that's a challenge.
Yeah. Like my immediate question, I haven't read through this PR that's closed because I can't do barely one thing at once. But my immediate question would be, where would you put additional file metadata beyond just the file name, say users and permissions? And I think the answer to that is like, oh, why don't I just use the tar instead of trying to replicate tar file header data in an annotation? And that's so, yeah, okay. Nice, Tianon. I agree with you, I think.
Give him a nice little heart emoji.
Yeah. I'll give you a thumbs up.
I'll take the counterpoint, which is I think a lot of people are trying to use a container registry as a distribution for tools that don't know how to talk to container registries necessarily. And so they just want to hit the blob store and pull back the bytes in the same format they're expecting to pull back those bytes in other tools that don't know how to work with TARs.
And that works, right? It just wouldn't work with this cap.
Correct.
And so the tension is that there are tools that don't care about this cap, and there are people that want to use the artifacts those tools produce with this cap, and that doesn't work because they weren't co-designed in mind with compatibility.
Well, I will say that KEP really wanted to support their use case, and they started driving down into, oh, now we need to pretty much re-implement the entire tar header inside of annotations or some other field in there. And if we try to do that, that's a whole lot of work we don't want to do right now. So let's kick that down the road to later and start off with just supporting OCI images.
I mean, I've been saying for, I think, 6 years at this point that it's really great if your OCI artifact looks a whole lot like an image, because all the tooling that expects tar GZs will just continue to work. And so having a thin wrapper around your bytes is a small price to pay to get broad compatibility. I don't know. I don't really see a problem, except that maybe tooling authors that have used OCI artifacts without thinking about file systems are now upset. I don't know. Seems working as intended. I'm happy with this result.
Are you happy with the folks that are saying we're just going to cram artifact type all over the image manifest?
I think that's fine. Like I mean, the way, so I haven't done this, but if I were to create a custom artifact type, what I would, I mean, I guess I kind of have done this, but what I would do is just like put, define it such that, hey, this looks a lot like an image, but there are specific files that I expect to be present with certain contents. And so like you're just adding an expectation of the file system so that tools know like, yeah, okay, I can read like John's magic JSON file at this specific location and it'll tell me what to do. It's like the dumbest thing you could do and everything just works. And you can reuse existing tooling. You can even use Docker builds and Docker files to like create your OCI artifacts. I know that doesn't work in like certain cases where maybe you're not shipping file systems around, but
yeah, because what we're seeing is that they're looking at our guidelines for artifact usage, where we say, look, you can ship whatever you want, but you must package a config media type that has a value matching whatever your artifact is or the empty value. And similar for your layers, those media types need to match what you're doing. Now, if the layer is a tar, fine, go ahead and use the OCI tar one. Although I expect that you're also going to support the whiteouts and other kinds of things that OCI requires in there. But if
Yeah.
your config is not an image config because it's not a runnable container image, and you want to be clear that this is not something that should be run by a container runtime, then you're getting into this area where you're throwing a field in there that's mislabeling what it is. Especially if they're going out of the way to set the artifact type in there to say, I'm not really a image, but I am.
I'm a big fan of lying to the old system to enable the new system to cohabitate. I think that's kind of the storied history of computers is lying to the old system to cohabitate with the new system. That is how teletypes and TLS3 all work, and I think it's fine. I don't really see a problem with it, honestly.
I'm imagining what Yarn would think, because they've not updated their clarification in a long while. I think a bunch of us were waiting on that. And I was one of the people giving a hard time on this one, but
Which one?
I'm looking to make sure I got the right one before I paste the link here.
I feel like
They
I should
were
write
clarifying.
down my opinions about all this so that I can just point to it. Because the OCI spec can't be like super opinionated about this, but I certainly can.
We put stuff in the spec to try to clarify that, hey, we're expecting certain things here.
It's hard because it's like what you expect implementations to do versus what what they should allow versus what clients should actually do to have a good experience. Artifacts clarification.
Yeah. Bjorn's PR, we haven't gone over it in a long while. I think it needed to be updated since then, but it was basically trying to differentiate. How do you tell the difference between artifact and an image? How would a runtime tell the difference?
Wow, this has a lot of comments.
Yeah.
Put it on the queue.
There was a lot of back and forth. I was on multiple sides of that one too, so. But I do see the value of something being able to say, look, it's either a container image or it's not. Runtimes need to be able to know the difference.
Do they?
I mean, if you throw something at them that claims to be but isn't, and then it makes it do something weird.
Well, I mean, they're not sentient, the runtimes, so they're not just like going to the grocery store and picking out an artifact and trying to run it. Like an operator is instructing it to attempt to run something, and so it's like, yeah, I mean, if you put the square peg in the round hole, it may not work, and that's kind of expected.
I was just answering a question on the cosine Slack the other day of someone saying I tried to do a Docker pull on a .sig. Why didn't it work?
Yeah, exactly.
People will try to do this stuff, and I think the idea here was that we should give the runtime engines, the container engines, the ability to give some kind of better feedback and more appropriate error handling when they see this content.
Yeah,
That's
so I
reasonable.
think from Bjorn's perspective, they're looking for a way for making that Docker pull of a .sig give a better error message than just, I don't know how to extract this content. More like, this content is a cosine signature and I don't handle those. Or I guess with the containerd integration, the pull will work just fine. It will be the run that will fail with, hey, this is a cosine signature, it's not a runnable artifact. Instead of something like failed to extract layer XYZ because it's not a tar, or failed to run image because there's no executable here.
Or the config JSON didn't have some mandatory field.
Yeah, but I think even with what's proposed here in this model spec, we have that, right? That's what artifact type is. Artifact type at the top level already tells us this isn't an image that we should try running.
Does it? It should, but does it?
Ah,
If it doesn't, then why do we even have artifact type? Why do
so
we
that
even bother with that field? Let's just get rid of it and have everything be an OCI image manifest.
that
I mean,
field
original-
exists because you want to query for it in the refers API.
Yeah, and it was also people want to be able to ship an empty config. Originally, we were just going to say put it right in the config.
Should we just put like in the cosine config entry point, this is a cosine signature, not a binary. Please don't try to Docker run this.
Yeah,
And
there
then
you go.
it'll fail with that.
Except it'll fail before that when it tries to extract the layers. Yeah. It's a pain.
I don't
But I
know.
think artifact type is the right answer here. Is that Moby should be considering the artifact type when it's trying to run an image.
I think it is the right place, but I think when you're doing that, you shouldn't be passing a config that says I'm also an OCI container image.
But the config media type just describes the schema of that JSON document that we defined in the OCI. It's not really here nor there on whether this is a runnable image. It just happens to be metadata that maps to a runnable image, much of
But
which
that-
is still applicable to non-runnable images.
I think the config schema itself is probably going to say otherwise. Let me pull that up. I have to fact check this one because I feel like our config JSON is, this is the definition for an OCI runnable image. It's an order collection of.
It
those
has a
file systems.
collection of metadata that is useful if you're trying to run the image, like a default command and default environment variables and a list of diff IDs for the rootfs layers that we should just delete from that schema entirely. But it also has like a history array of describing the layers in human readable text, which arguably should be annotations on the layer descriptors, but 6 of one, half a dozen of another. This is where we put it. Again, to John's point, because we were keeping compatibility with the old system. This config JSON, if you trace the history, is roughly the exact same schema that the original Docker implementation 0. whatever had for its image metadata. It's been essentially unchanged for 11 and a half years.
Yeah, I like it. I like when artifacts have the minimal set of things in this config blob that make old clients okay with it, mostly the diff IDs. But I know it's weird. I don't know that like I can't run a cosine signature is sufficient a problem to like update the spec. But
we already did. We added artifact type at the top level so that a cosine signature can have an artifact type that says, I am a cosine signature, so that a runtime can say, oh, this is a cosine signature. I actually don't know how to run that as an image.
yeah.
I'm going to bail early and tell the user that this media type, this artifact type is no good for me.
Yeah, I think it'd even be reasonable to just warn like, hey, this artifact type field means this probably isn't runnable. But I'll try anyway because you told me to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that might be reasonable guidance for runtimes to have.
He said must in the spec, though. It said when you're packaging this thing, the config media type value must be specific to the artifact type.
Gotta let some people be renegades out there.
And I mean,
Feels good.
a lot of artifacts were written prior to us saying must in there.
Yeah, but this one specifically links to our documentation.
Yeah. Womp womp.
Yeah, I flagged an issue on them saying, hey,
But
you
I
guys
think
are,
the point there is that it's probably the spec that's wrong. If there were pre-existing artifacts for which the must is too restrictive, then we can't say must in the spec. That's why we have should versus must from a spec perspective, is because we have to deal with the world of pre-existing data and patterns.
My own take is if you see that config media type that says I'm an OCI image, it's an OCI image. It's not an artifact. And it's a black or white. There's no fuzzy gray thing where I made an artifact that looks like an image or otherwise. And that way, when runtime see that config media type, they know what they got. And I know where you're coming from, John, because I'm not going to call out the cosign.
The two
you
most
pre-existed.
prevalent OCI artifacts have the config media type as the OCI config.
For historical reasons.
And so it's weird to say, like, no, you must not do this. Because if you're a client reading through this, you're just like, oh, they must not do this. So therefore, I'm going to write my client as though that's an impossibility. And then you're unable to deal with cosign signatures or homebrew archives, which is not great. I don't know that it matters that much, but maybe it does.
So tools that encounter that, though, would see it and they would treat it like an OCI image. How would they? They're not necessarily going to break. They're just going to treat it like an OCI
they're going to
image.
fail to parse the layers because they're going to treat the layers as tarballs.
If
may
they
or may
try
not
to,
be.
if they're trying to parse the layers.
But
Depends
what
on the
other
tool.
reason would they need to know that it's an OCI image?
I mean, if we're talking about tools that's just copying content around, doesn't care what's in there.
I mean, semantically, the only thing that the media type field of our config descriptor tells us is the media type of the data pointed to by digest, right? So it tells us that the object we pull from the blob API or from the OCI layout at that digest will be of the schema defined by that media type. It doesn't tell us anything about the manifest itself that contains that config descriptor.
Well, we got the manifest media type, but we already overrode that one.
But that's why we added the manifest artifact type, is specifically to resolve this problem. That we need the config media type to be descriptive of the config blob, because that's its purpose. That's why that descriptor has media type in it, so that you know what the blob you're pulling is.
Yeah.
So when a container image sees a manifest that has that artifact type set, and it's only supposed to run container images, and so it says, well, hey, it says a container image, but you have that artifact type set, what should it do?
It should either error or warn.
Or work. Like, I don't think it's a problem that it can work, right? Like that you have an artifact type that is also a valid container image. I mean, this was one of my proposals years ago that was like, hey, what if we just have this canonical tiny binary that all it does is print, hey, don't run me. And then that's going to get deduplicated across the universe as the entry point for all your artifacts. And then everything's fine. Like, I don't see a problem with a runnable artifact that, like, you know, like there are certain shared objects in like dynamically linked libraries that you can run as a binary, and they'll be like, oh, hey, I'll let you configure stuff about like set cap, but also you can link against them, and they both work, and it's cool and it's fine and very confusing, but it's also like not bad. Everyone's fine with this. You know, I think it's fine for an OCI artifact to also be a runnable image.
I'm intentionally avoiding the WASM artifacts.
But to run a WASM artifact, you need a runtime that knows how to handle a WASM artifact, right? Like, you can't run one of those without a runtime that knows what to do with that blob and has some analogous run C that can handle that blob. So you have to have code in your runtime that handles that specific artifact type and knows what to do with that.
John,
That shouldn't have even been an artifact. It's just an image. It's not an artifact.
Well, it's
John,
it's not because so the image is a rootfs. They don't want to treat the components that go into it as part of the rootfs, and that's the issue with the WASM. But
yeah, they're shipping the binary directly. They don't have a file system at all.
yeah, and it could be multiple. Like in the future, it could be multiple components stitched together.
But even still, that's fine, right? Because they specify an artifact type that is unambiguously a WASM-WASI artifact, and a runtime that knows how to deal with those will recognize that artifact type and know to invoke the correct runtime to run that artifact.
I just want to know how John has stayed away from this conversation so long because
I
we've been
haven't.
missing you.
You've been gone. Where you been at?
Had a child. It's been terrible.
Yeah.
I know.
Can I ask a stupid question real quick? Does it have to be proven that the artifact must be used by what's in the container? Is there some test that needs to be run? Otherwise, you are loading artifacts that have nothing to do.
Can you say more?
Well, here's the thing. Every time that I get into projects, there's always in code somewhere, there's bloat. And I'm concerning that someone will say, hey, I have this artifact that I want to stick in the container. It's for the future. It's for the future, but it's not being executed now. And therefore, I believe that you're creating a dangerous precedent to actually allow garbage to be entered into a container that doesn't have to be there.
How is that different from what is happening in 99% of images already?
I'm not saying it's not, but I
Okay.
believe that creating a specification like this, where's the true value in it? Because I'm agreeing that if you actually create the interface and you have an artifact that is being used by a container, I'm totally happy for that. But it gets down to the fact that if you actually find bloat, you want to minimize and create quality solutions. And I'm just uncomfortable when I'm saying all these things to you guys because you're all smarter than me, okay? I'm just uncomfortable when I'm hearing this discussion.
We're not smarter. We've just been having this debate a long time, and so we keep
Sorry.
going back in circles and poking each other's hot button issues a whole bunch just for fun.
Sorry. I'll be
No,
quiet.
No, I mean, like, I don't think you're wrong. Like, the company I work for is basically only exists because you're right. So, like, I think that is a problem. I don't know that we can solve that problem at this kind of unopinionated spec level where we tell people how to move gzip tarballs around. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that that's like within our ability to solve, because people are going to put whatever they want in these artifacts, and like that's fine.
Oh, I know that. I agree. But the specifications are to be there for the benefit of the container. And if we're creating specifications that don't provide quality or benefit to the container, why are we doing it is my question. I'm being more rudimentary in what I'm thinking here.
Yeah, I was going to say compatibility.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. I agree.
Yeah, I think we're at the layer of the stack where it is, make sure things work together, and making them not garbage is kind of outside of our purview, I think. But I get that we can make decisions that influence that. I don't have good ideas.
Thank you for listening.
Speaking of garbage, we haven't talked about this hard link PR.
We have, though.
Was I here?
No.
That's okay. I'm just gonna mute myself. Was it
We,
last
we,
week?
we didn't today. Long time ago, and it went back and forth a few times, and then we refreshed it.
TLDR. Hard links are
TLDR. Yeah, hard links are hard. People were looking at saying, hey, is it possible for me to do a hard link across multiple layers? And we finally came back and said, please don't do that. And if you do, the results are who knows.
Undefined behavior.
are there like real technical limitations for that, or is it just like implementations not considering it? 'Cause I know I have implementations that haven't considered this.
So I think overlay itself says if you do that, it potentially pulls up stuff. So I threw the link into the
Oh,
overlay
look at that.
spec
Yeah.
there. But I would look at it from a higher level there, which is that layers are not necessarily bound to their previous layers. A lot of times we assume that you build an image, and if you ever change it, once you change one layer, everything after that is new and they're always attached to it. But we've also, in this group, I think we've looked at things and said, hey, we can rebase stuff, and it implies that you can potentially share a layer between multiple images. So if you had multiple images all doing different bases for that, and you made that hard link supported, that hard link would have different content in it depending on what order the images.
That's yeah. That seems This seems reasonable to me as someone who is like has tar files as their special interest. But I could see this being very confusing for like most people. Cool. I'll read this link and then I'll review your PR as my duty.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to derail the rest of the conversation, but I did.
No, I was enjoying your derailing because we didn't have a rest of the topic for today anyway, and then I dropped off because my laptop seems to be acting super flaky right now. But I am curious to go back a little bit to the discussion on the AI model proposal they're looking at when they start throwing artifact type all over everything. What do people here see as the value of throwing artifact type all over something that has effectively an OCI image and the layers and everything else in there to be an OCI image? What's the value add of putting an artifact type on that thing? Specifically, it's something that is intentionally designed to be imported by a container runtime, specifically designed to be unpacked by a container runtime. What's the value add of an artifact type at that point versus a tag on whatever the content is, an annotation inside the manifest?
I mean, I do think it is an annotation that grew up a little bit. This is my ideal type of OCI artifact, I think, is that it's there are constraints on the file system that clients can rely on, I imagine. Like, I assume there are like certain types of files that are expected to be in certain places. If it is just literally like, oh, you just run the entry point and like there's the client doesn't have to know anything about this other than the fact that it's an OCI image, then I don't know that there's a ton of value in it. But I think if there are like specific types of files that are expected to be in certain places, then I think it's a totally reasonable use of an artifact type field to say, oh, hey, this is a model. I haven't read through their spec.
And I'm just thinking, should that really be something that is the artifact type, or should that be more an annotation?
Well, looking at their config in their example, which I don't know if that's accurate, it's size 2, so presumably empty. And so something needs to know how to run this that isn't a container runtime. So I think going back to our previous conversation, having the artifact type field there is useful for both the expected client and unintended clients to distinguish between a normal image.
That's the top level artifact type. I think Brandon is opposed to the artifact type in every single layer descriptor.
Oh,
I mean, I'm opposed to all of them, but those two.
yeah, the ones in the layer are weird. I could take them or leave them. I think those are...
common ground.
Hey, there's a typo in this example. They spelled format wrong. That's not good. I mean, they have multiple layer artifact types. That seems fine. I mean, it could be an annotation.
But it doesn't really change much semantically, annotation versus artifact type. Right? Functionally, they're equivalent ways to say that this isn't just a standard tar. This has this specific type of data in it.
Yeah, I think they don't necessarily need these. The only weird thing I'm seeing is like, it's not weird, but like they're defining some of them are gzipped or not. I think they're doing that kind of in the normal way. There's a lot of inconsistency in this document.
I'm pretty sure they don't want to have gzip because their model is already compressed.
Yeah. I like that. Better. No gzip, please.
Which why honestly they don't want tar in there either, I don't think, but they're doing it because they have to.
Because of the kep?
Yep. They've got their two goals at the top where they try to say, hey, we're making an artifact, but to make an artifact that works with this one thing, it has to be an OCI image. And so we're going to do both.
I see.
I think that's a good end state, frankly. I think having them do tarballs for metadata like file name makes sense, or at least a tar header. Calling it a tarball is a bit rich when it's a single file with a tar header, because it provides benefits to their use case also.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in practice, like, you almost always should have used a tar file if you're not using one, because if you have one of something, why not two of that thing? This is often the case with proto buffs. Repeated fields are nice.
Yeah.
So
I would say I'm not opposed to them using all the OCI media types. I'm just opposed to them saying now that they've done that, that what they're creating is an artifact.
Oh, okay. I get this. There's they can't change the media type because the kep requires them to be OCI media types.
The
They're
KEP
putting-
requires that as an OCI image.
I think this is fine. Like,
And so this is one of those cases where they would absolutely make all their immediate types and be a proper artifact if the KEP allowed it. But because the KEP doesn't, and the KEP says you must give us an OCI image, but they want to be an artifact, that they're trying to do this like halfway point that I feel like is going to break things. If anything is saying, if you're an artifact type, then you're an artifact, then I'm not going to support you. Depending on what the tool is. What if it is a vulnerability scanner that is scanning for files that have malicious content in it, and it sees the artifact type and it says, well, it's not a runnable container image. I'm going to go ahead and skip that in my scan. But then a container runtime looks at it and says, well, am I going to allow it or not? I will allow it. Then all of a sudden you get compromised content coming through.
I think it's problematic to have a vulnerability scanner that is not opportunistically trying to scan as much content as it possibly can, whether it knows what that content is or not.
I mean, fair, but I think a lot of tools are written for specifically working with an OCI image. And so what is their switch of whether or not they're going to work with an OCI image?
John, are you going to say duck typing, or do I need to say duck typing?
I like duck typing. Duck typing is good typing. Does anyone know if the like KEP implementation cares about diff IDs?
I think they're pushing everything off to whatever the runtime engine is. And so I think the runtime engine probably cares. It's going to be like container deep only then.
From the KEP level, they're kind of constrained by what runtimes can reasonably implement, and diff IDs are how runtimes think about images and layers today. And so it's a natural extension to believe that they could mount an image. Like I have a colleague who's been doing the implementation of mounting images in Moby, and he was thrilled with how straightforward it was to do so because, you know, Moby already has all the image mounting code, all the image extraction code, all the layering code. It's just taking that existing thing and plugging it in a new place, which I think was the goal of the KEP in the first place, was to make sure that implementation would be straightforward. Or at least a goal, not the goal.
I don't hate this.
I do.
Well, that's not great.
T-Non's just in the middle saying, I just hate the one part.
Which
The other
part do you
parts are-
hate?
Well, I don't actually hate any of it. I think it's fine all the way through, honestly. I think
including the artifact type on the layers.
the artifact type on the layers is a little bit weird and eyebrow raising, and would be less eyebrow raising if there were more disparate artifact types. Like they're all OCI tarballs, but this one is XYZ AI model, and this one is, I don't know, something else, a README markdown. Then it would make more sense to have artifact type on every layer, and I could see the use case. But I don't hate any of it. Seems mostly okay. There are clear signals for runtimes that this is not something that they can or should run, but there are also clear signals for runtimes that this is something that they could extract and mount within a container reasonably and expect the same semantics as they do from an OCI image, such as whiteouts and layering. That they're not going to get halfway through this and suddenly it switches from tar to a raw readme.md that they can't extract and mount on top of a tar.
Yeah, I'm really curious what all the different tars are. And I'm guessing that they just kind of took a manifest and just mutated to look like what they wanted to have with their artifact types without thinking about the individual layers. Because if their model is fully compressed and it's just one large binary, then why would they have 3 layers?
I mean, one of the reasons you would want to separate out the layers is just deduplication for the large models and being able to reuse those without push a new thing every time you like change the configuration. I mean, that's something you could just do at the by convention, but like I get why you would split out your giant binaries from the documentation and configuration.
Do they have a way today to do like a delta on a model and ship that out? I don't know. It's a question I've been curious for a while.
I'm certain some of these tools have something like that, and if they don't, then they should start growing it, which would be a great reason to do this. Like this is exactly how the Windows-based images work, right? They all have 2 layers unless it's the brand new roll-up layer where they have a base layer and then they have a Windows Update layer. And on Patch Tuesday, it's the second Windows Update layer that updates so that you get a smaller delta for updates. So you're not re-downloading the 8 to 10 gigabytes of Windows every single Patch Tuesday. But this means of storing their layers affords them that, right? As long as they can store those deltas as separate files
That's the question.
and have their tooling read them, which if they can read a single file, reading 2 files isn't that complicated.
I don't know if they've done that for their storage today of
Yeah,
defining
it depends on the data structure of the file itself. Like there are complications there, but they're complications that they should deal with anyways, especially as these models get larger, because I don't think the models are going to be shrinking anytime soon.
Yeah, my impression is that we've got a whole bunch of weights that the model is storing and is compressing all those into a big binary blob of some kind. And so when you update the model and rerun it, you're going to change probably 90% of the weights, but you're going to change them very little. And so they would need some kind of way to store that delta in a very compressible format and then apply it. And I don't know if anybody's done that yet, which is kind of what I'm curious about being outside of that space.
What I see different layers being used as is for storing other metadata or other factors. If you look at Olama, for example, they use OCI artifacts, right? And model is just one layer, and other layers are different things.
What you bring up, why not compress some of that? If they're, I see in their example, they've got a bunch of JSON files and other stuff they're apparently being shipped as files in a license and a README.
Yeah.
That's all very compressible data. All right, that's all I had. I derailed enough on this one, but I did think it was good to get a bunch of eyes on that one. Anyone else have interesting topics for the day? Apologies for me dropping off a few times. There's like a crazy windstorm, 50-mile-an-hour winds outside, and who knows what's going on. My laptop and Amber Alerts and other stuff coming through the phone right now.
You okay?
I'm still in one piece. Yeah. But next week we will have Ram show up hopefully, and he'll give us his demo. He's been working on making new layer media types for like some of the stuff at Sochi, Squash FS, Arrow FS. I'm not sure if I pronounced that one right, but he's got ways of building the images and ways of mounting those and running it in a container runtime. So it should be interesting. All right. Anybody else have stuff you want to chat about? 5 minutes to go, or we can break early. Going once, going twice. John, good seeing you.
Same.
Everybody else
Toodles.
good seeing you too. Not just John, but we miss having John for having these discussions. All right. Cheers, everybody.
Yep.